Hello fellow strugglers, welcome back to another marvelous anime video. When we think of a series that belongs to the dark fantasy genre, we often associate it with gothic themes, graphic violence, and a sullen atmosphere. While all of these above-mentioned things are present in Berserk as well, what sets it apart is the deeply layered characters and the intricately designed world that have been created by Kentaro Miura. Berserk was created after the author performed extensive research into aspects of our own lives, including the occult, religion, and history, as well as cerebral aspects such as mental health, as well as deep philosophical and metaphysical tropes, all of which have been explored in great detail. This leads to every single character feeling very well developed and written. The world, although based in fantasy, is very much grounded in reality thanks to this. The series explores profound human themes, including existential crises, fate versus free will, mental health, and the meaning of being human. Out of all the characters in the series, none are as well written and compelling as the protagonist Guts. Through Guts and the various experiences that shape his character, Miura pushes the majority of the most important narrative tropes in the series. This means that if you can gain some clarity regarding Guts' character, then the series and its deeper underlying philosophies that drive it readily unravel in front of you. For those unfamiliar with the series, it's easy to mistake Guts as just another lumbering protagonist carrying a giant sword, tearing demons to shred while out on a quest of vengeance. This might seem like a tale that's been told a million times before, but nothing could be further from the truth. Guts is a complicated man who is defined by conflict, even from the moment of his violent birth. Found underneath the corpse of his dead mother, his very beginning is steeped in a constant struggle for survival in a world where his very existence is an affront to the twisted natural order of things. Within the brutish exterior, the author subtly unfolds a delicate philosophical and psychological narrative, grounding his character in reality and making him extremely relatable to the audience. In today's video, we seek to explore some of these psychological facts about Guts, including his death drive, depression, and existential struggle. We're going to leave no stone unturned, so strap on in as we take you on a ride through the dreary world of Berserk and explore what truly shapes not just Guts, but Berserk as a whole. Let's begin. Exploring Guts' hidden trauma and betrayal and how it shaped his personality. One of the things that most defined and shaped Guts' character over his life has to be the betrayal and the resulting trauma from it. Guts was raised in a mercenary gang led by a man called Gambino after he was found under the dead corpse of his mother, who had been hung from a tree. This has to be one of the most traumatic ways of being born ever, and one can say his very birth is defined by trauma. The woman who took care of him after that was called Shisu, and she had just lost her own child due to miscarriage. Nobody knows why she decided to take pity on the infant. Perhaps it was the trauma of losing her own child. Regardless, Gambino, who considered the baby an ill omen, relented to Shisu's request as he had a soft spot for her. However, when she dies prematurely, he directs his ire towards Guts and blames him for her death. As the young boy grows up, the only family he could call his own is a mercenary gang, with Gambino serving as a father figure, even teaching him the art of the sword. All seems to be going well for the young boy until one day, when Guts is resting his weary body after his first ever battle, he's ambushed and sexually assaulted by a brutish fiend named Donovan, who is a member of his mercenary gang. He proceeds to rape the young boy brutally, later revealing that the one who had sold him out was Gambino himself. This leads to Guts having a perpetual aversion to physical touch, allowing only Casca to ever touch him, and later, eventually, Shirke. As if this wasn't enough, Donovan's claim that Gambino had sold him to the brute turned out to be true. Further, the old mercenary even assaults Guts, trying to slay him out of spite and frustration. No matter what his flaws were, Gambino was the only father figure Guts had ever known, and being betrayed in such a fashion truly led to Guts mistrusting everyone and becoming a lone wolf until he met Griffith and the Band of the Hawk. However, perhaps his biggest trauma would come much later, during the events of the Fifth Eclipse, which is perhaps the most pivotal event in all of Berserk. After Guts abandons the Band of the Hawk to pursue his own dreams, Griffith spirals out of control and beds the Princess of Midland, Charlotte. The king, who had coveted his own daughter's virginity, sentences the former hero of the land to torture while proclaiming the Band of the Hawk outlaws. There, in the Tower of Rebirth, Griffith is subjected to such inhumane torture he is broken, not just of body, but mind as well. He's rescued in the end by Guts and some of the members of the Band of the Hawk. However, unable to take his pathetic plight, Griffith tries to end his own life unsuccessfully. However, he does manage to successfully activate his Crimson Behelit, bringing about the Fifth Eclipse and the start of the infernal invocation of Doom. After being convinced of his destiny and purpose and reminded of his dreams by the idea of evil, Griffith willingly sacrifices all his comrades to ascend into an all-powerful demonic entity who's part of a group called the God Hand. As a result of his choices, All of his comrades are brutally devoured by the apostles gathered to witness the ceremony. The reincarnated Griffith then goes on to rape Casca in front of Guts, who loses an eye and an arm while trying to stop his former comrade. The trauma of seeing the man he most admired turn on him and cause the death of all his comrades and the violation of the woman he loves pushes Guts over the edge. He becomes the infamous Black Swordsman who becomes almost as inhumane as his prey in his quest for vengeance against the apostles and the God Hand, in particular Griffith, who is now known as Femto. During his Black Swordsman arc, Guts is shown as cold and unfeeling, doing whatever it takes to face down his foes. He was driven by a singular emotion, rage, and was not looking to save anyone. All he wanted to do was bring utter ruin to the agents of causality, and he didn't care if the whole world burned in the process as long as his thirst for vengeance was sated. This was not only the result of the trauma and betrayal inflicted upon him by Griffith, but the sum of every single one of these instances he had experienced throughout his life. Even after he regains some of his humanity later, as he begins to travel with Shirke, Puck, Barnace, Serpico, and Isidro, he retains his brooding and closed-off nature due to these past events that have shaped him. It will be interesting to see where his journey will ultimately lead him and whether he'll finally find redemption, be able to put down not just his giant sword, but his trauma as well. Exploring his constant struggle with rage and his inner beast. Guts' life is one mired in violence ever since his birth. Having been born from a corpse and raised by mercenaries, life has been a battlefield since he can remember. Over the years, he's had to go through countless experiences that have built up his rage. From the numerous betrayals and the trauma he's experienced that we just spoke about earlier, it's only natural that a person who's been through so much would build up an immense amount of anger. For Guts, due to the world he lives in and the things he's been through, his rage is his armor and the pain is his fuel. While earlier, before his betrayal at the hands of Griffith, Guts killed out of a sense of duty and purpose, and no doubt he channeled his rage during those moments to commit those acts, but it was nothing compared to what he became after the 5th eclipse. Following the 5th eclipse, no sooner had he recovered from his injuries than Guts donned the persona of the Black Swordsman. In this version, he was rage incarnate, and it almost looked like he derived pleasure from the pain he was inflicting on those he believed did him wrong. In this state, Guts not only nurtured the beast within him, but also gave into it with reckless abandon, destroying everyone and everything that lay between him and his vengeance. He was an avenger in the truest sense. However, in this darkest moment, we see him making an almost regretful face when the Count's daughter declares that she'll forever hate him and that he'll be an object of her hate and vengeance for the rest of her life. This shows that even during the Black Swordsman arc, where he's barely human, stooping to the point of even fornicating with apostles just to get his revenge, there's still a struggle within the beast inside of him. We find out later that this beast was more than just an allegory, but a very real thing when he comes to inherit the Berserker armor. He got this armor from the witch Flora, who was Shirke's master, after her hideout was invaded by apostles led by the great flame dragon Grunbeld. The might of this armor is so great that Grunbeld acknowledges Guts' superiority as a warrior and transforms into his apostle form. This armor was crafted by a dwarven master, Hanar, and imbued with an ominous ode that allowed the armor to greatly enhance the wearer's physical prowess, but at a great cost. The armor draws its power from Guts' negative emotions, like rage, something which he has in abundance. While the armor is on and Guts is tapping into it, he feels no pain. All of his wounds are temporarily mended so that he can fight on, and he becomes a berserker in the truest sense. However, wearing the armor takes a massive physical and mental toll on him, as his consciousness needs to be pulled back from the edge every single time by Shirke, and his body is left in tatters after the effects of the armor wear off. When he has his armor on, the helm takes the shape of a canine, representative of the beast inside. We're shown the beast tempting him to devour and violate Casca and the rest of his companions. It constantly urges him to give in to his darkest desires so that he might be able to pronounce his judgment on those who have wronged him. The only reason his inner beast doesn't completely try to assert itself on Guts is because he believes that by regaining his humanity, thanks to traveling with his new companions, when he ultimately does lose them to tragedy, the recoil of this will be so great that Guts' inner rage and fury will be unlike anything we've seen before. This entity believes that it's letting Guts stew into a much tastier meal for the taking down the line. Ironically, Guts must tap into his inner demons to fight the demons outside. However, it's a fine line he treads as he works hard to keep the monsters within at bay. It can also be viewed as a manifestation of the psyche's protective mechanisms. However, there's no use for such power if it threatens to devour him before his goals are accomplished. Throughout the series, we see Guts struggling to repress the beast inside, lest he become the very monsters that he hunts with such fervor. This entire inner struggle adds a layer of complexity, makes him much greater than the sum of his parts, and elevates his character greatly. It forces the audience to walk down the same thin rope as Guts, forcing them to see the fine line that separates the hero from the anti-hero or even the villain. exploring fate versus free will and the anomaly that is guts. The world of Berserk is governed by an esoteric law called the law of causality. In the now omitted chapter, also known as the Lost Chapter of Berserk, we're introduced to an entity called the idea of evil. During the fifth eclipse, Griffith's consciousness is taken on a tour to familiarize him with the cosmic nature of Berserk's universe. Deep within the recesses of the astral plane, he meets an entity that proclaims itself to be the idea of evil. It tells Griffith that it was born out of humanity's need to attach reason to things that transcend their limited comprehension. Human beings needed to find reason and meaning for their suffering, pain, sorrow, and destiny so that they could endure it. The thought that these things happened without rhyme or reason was too much for humanity to bear. It is this desire and their collective consciousness that gave birth to the idea of evil. It also granted this entity the ability to shape and determine human destiny, but since it was born out of such negative emotions, it steeped the fate of mankind into an immutable journey of suffering and existence. It created the law of causality as a means to propagate this state of existence. Thanks to its existence, every individual's fate in Berserk is predetermined and inescapable. Whether you like it or not, the law of causality has already woven the threads of destiny long before you were ever born. The idea of free will doesn't exist within the Berserk universe thanks to causality. While most humans are fated to mundane existences, often blemished by evil, with their lives amounting to nothing in the grand scheme of causality, there are others for whom this incomprehensible law has chalked out a much more elaborate plan. Some examples of these are the individuals chosen to become apostles, God Hand, or the sacrifices that facilitate their ascendance. There's no escaping this fate, as Nosferatu Zod tells Guts during their first battle. According to Zod's statement, if Griffith's dreams were to fail, then Guts would meet an inescapable death. The Apostle was referring to the events of the fifth eclipse and Guts being marked by the brand of sacrifice like every other mortal in that space and time. However, what the Apostle did not account for was that ever since his birth, Guts has been an anomaly in causality's weave. While the brand of sacrifice, which is a mark seared onto the flesh of those being sacrificed by an individual for their ascendancy, almost always results in the demise of the marked person, Guts and Casca somehow managed to escape this ordained fate of theirs thanks to the intervention of the Skull Knight. The Eldritch Knight recognizes that something far greater than his intervention was at work in Guts' survival, and, in recognition of him being this anomaly, dubs him the Struggler. Just like his nickname suggests, Guts has been struggling against his fate from his very birth. The odds of a child surviving after being born from a corpse are next to none. He struggled against this fate and refused to relinquish his hold on life and survived. Next came the incident with Donovan and Gambino, and despite being traumatized and betrayed yet again, this young boy survived against all odds. Then came the greatest of all the tragedies in his life, betrayed and branded for death in a ceremony that has a 100% mortality rate. Guts manages to live through this ordeal, not to mention the countless near-death experiences he's had in his quest for vengeance, as he regularly went up against the Apostles, who were eclipsed by an ordinary human in terms of strength and prowess in every avenue. Despite being brutally injured in his fights against these monsters, he always comes out on top. This is significant because his apostles are individuals who have given up their humanity after being unable to endure the pain inflicted on them by the machinations of causality. For them to lose to someone who's been subjected to as much or perhaps even more pain than they have, despite which this individual refuses to bend their knee to causality, makes Guts almost an antithesis to the law of causality. His very existence is an affront to this twisted, unnatural order of things and an affirmation of the existence of free will in a world bereft of it. How Berserk deals with mental health issues through the character of Guts. We've spoken about the trauma that Guts harbors and the inner beast of rage that was born as a result of it. However, what is often largely ignored is the depression that he's constantly in due to it being masked by his indomitable willpower. There are several symptoms of depression that we can easily identify in Guts, starting with his social withdrawal in the early days after the fifth eclipse. After leaving Casca in the care of Godot, Erica, and Rickert, Guts leaves to wage a vengeful war against the Apostles in the God Hand. Despite Godot admonishing him for leaving a helpless Casca alone instead of caring for her and nursing each other, Guts chooses to travel alone until he meets Puck. His inability to care for her reflects his struggle with emotional intimacy and responsibility, both of which are often impacted by depression. Throughout the Black Swordsman arc and well into the Conviction arc, Guts is mostly a lone wolf. Yes, Puck exists, and his personality is a welcome contrast to Guts' brooding nature, but he's more of a narrative tool to provide comic relief while acting as a moral anchor for him in his travels. He shows persistent anger and irritability towards Puck and anyone who tries to get close to him during this period. This is something that many people have diagnosed as a serious symptom of depression as well. Another thing to note here is the way he throws himself in front of danger with reckless abandon. Out of all the people in the world, Guts is the one most familiar with just how dangerous and powerful even apostles are compared to the God Hand. Yet he embarks on his quest to slay these fiends, which in retrospect is actually extremely suicidal. He has no hope of ever accomplishing this task as a mere human, and every single battle against the apostles takes a huge toll on him physically. Whether it's Rosine, the Count, the Snake Baron, or even Mozgus, the fact that Guts even comes out on top at all is a testament to the absolute limits of what a human is capable of. These are literal monsters who can devour entire towns and settlements if they so choose, yet this struggler manages to kill them all. The point here is that challenging these creatures head-on like Guts does is a fool's errand, and despite the fact that he succeeds, it's a massive risk. He could so easily have gone the other route and tried to carve out a peaceful life with Casca, which would have been challenging enough as they're destined to be haunted by evil beings thanks to their brands of sacrifice. Yet he goes down the self-destructive path, which is quite literally manifested when he dons the Berserker armor. The armor is a reflection of his own inner turmoil, resulting in sadness and depression, which has led him down this path. Even the very fact that Guts continues to rely on the Berserker armor is proof of his self-destructive tendencies. While it is true that the armor does provide him with the necessary edge while fighting his inhuman opponents, the price it exacts is far too great. Every time he uses the armor for an extended period, he risks losing his soul to the beast, while his lifespan is considerably reduced thanks to him pushing through his injuries instead of letting them heal properly. Prior to meeting Shirke, Guts embodies nihilism, as he knows that his quest will probably end up taking his life as well. He doesn't envision a happily ever after and is single-mindedly focused on bringing the individuals who wronged him to their deaths. However, while this nihilistic side is itself an indicator of the depression that plagues Guts, the face that he makes when the Count's daughter vows vengeance upon him truly betrays the sadness lurking in his heart. In the latest chapters, after Casca is kidnapped by Griffith following his easy defeat of Guts in their fight, the struggler is visibly depressed. This is the first time that Guts lets us see him in utter despair, unable to continue moving forward. It just goes to show that despite him leaving Casca behind initially, she is indeed his emotional anchor. The manner in which he loses her seems to have completely broken what remained of Guts' will, making it seem not so indomitable now. This severely sets him back, as he had begun to reclaim his humanity, and he'd begun to put his vengeance in the backseat in favor of protecting Casca and restoring her to her former self. No sooner had he begun to heal his heart and mind than causality kicked him down once more, and this time he might not recover fully. Daiba describes him as a criminal burdened by karma who is lost adrift in his current state. In chapter 382, we see that Guts is being entombed within an ancient tomb called the Stupa, and he once again offers no resistance. When Farnace assumes that Guts has been put under a spell by the Kushan sorcerers and tries to communicate with him by entering his mind, she's shocked to find that he's under no spell, has simply just lost his will to live. This aspect of Guts' personality resonates with the audience, as things like depression are very much rooted in reality. Guts is a man fighting against insurmountable odds, both externally and internally. One could almost argue that his internal battles are even tougher than the fights he has to endure against the apostles, as it is a battle he has to win every single moment of his existence just to carry on. Looking at Guts' post-traumatic stress disorder, survivor's guilt, and how it shapes the narrative. Through the character of Guts, we're given a vivid picture of post-traumatic stress disorder by Miura in Berserk. The trauma that Guts experienced from the moment of his birth has led to him developing several traits that can be seen in people suffering from PTSD. For instance, he is hyper-vigilant at all times, even in safe sanctuaries. There isn't a moment where he's not being healed that Guts sleeps without the Dragon Slayer by his side. While the others in his group might be a bit more relaxed, having witnessed the horrors that he has, Guts is always on the lookout for threats. This sort of vigilance is often seen in people who have just returned from a battlefield. Guts experiences massive survivor's guilt after being the only Band of the Hawk member to make it out alive from the 5th eclipse. He most likely blames himself for the death of the Band of the Hawk members, as without his idea, they would never have rescued Griffith, which would never have caused the eclipse to take place in the first place. Going back even further, if he had only understood and heeded Nosferatu's Zod's warning about not letting Griffith's dream die and wandered off to find his own dreams, Griffith might not have lost control and done the things he did. If Guts had been content and not wandered off trying to become someone worthy of being Griffith's friend, he might still have his leader and comrades with him. Casca might still be whole, and they might have even had a small family together. However, thanks to his hubris and the need to prove himself, he abandoned the Hawks, which eventually led to the chain of events that caused this unimaginable tragedy. These are things that more than likely play inside his head constantly. Unable to subconsciously bear the burden of his own actions and survival, he rushes headlong into danger, putting his life constantly on the line. We can also say that perhaps Guts felt unworthy of Casca's affection and was almost afraid of being around her as it reminded him of his failures. This probably translated to his single-minded obsession with Griffith, as Guts probably felt he would get the death that eluded him, ridding him of this guilt and trauma. He's a man who's haunted by the ghosts of his past, both figuratively and literally. Towards the later stages of the series, we see him slowly healing from his PTSD thanks to his new companions. While his overarching goal remains the same, traveling with this new group certainly seems to have reduced his drive towards it by a great deal. It's almost like he's back during his nascent times with the Band of the Hawk. Griffith does loom above his head like a dangling sword, but Guts seemed almost willfully oblivious to this fact. Even the beast within recognizes the changes in it. In this way, Miura masterfully maneuvers his protagonist from a place of PTSD to a journey of healing. However, we know that a world that's governed by causality is especially vicious towards an anomaly like Guts, seeking to stamp him out the first chance it gets. After being left alone for quite some time, and even finding some succor and respite in Elfhelm, Griffith's capture of Casca threatens to undo all the healing that Guts has undergone in this time. We're unsure what version of Guts will emerge from the stupa the next time we see him. Regardless of this recent twist, after witnessing Guts' journey filled with heartache and trauma, it was beautiful to watch him mellow down quite a bit. From begrudgingly allowing Isidro to follow him, to letting Shirke physically touch him, which we know is a big deal after what happened to him with Donovan, Guts has begun to heal from the years of abuse and hardship he's been subjected to. Even though we know that this would never have happened, the way things were panning out in Elfhelm, in another world, he might have even put his sword down and settled in that mystical land far away from the misery that plagues the world. Kentaro Miura's masterful application of such a loaded theme like PTSD allows for Guts' character to grow and develop in such a relatable and organic way. Mixing this with his gradual psychological and emotional healing as he begins to reclaim his humanity offers a brief moment of respite in the life of the struggler that we don't often get to see. All of these things resulted in not just his character becoming more layered, but it also elevated the entire story as a whole. Exploring the struggler's fortitude that defines Guts' heroic endeavor. While his trauma, rage, and depression have molded Guts, it is his fortitude that defines him. The struggler is not a moniker that is lightly given to anyone. From the moment of his birth to his entombment in the stupa, Guts has displayed fortitude that makes him extraordinary despite being just a human. The world of Berserk is replete with examples of men and women who have crumbled under the unrelenting pressure of causality, leading them to abandon their humanity and become monsters. While many of their tales are tragic and evoke empathy from the reader, Guts has experienced things in his life that are equally, if not more, horrific. At any point in time, he could have just lain down and given up. He had no right to be born to begin with, and yet somehow he survived. After being molested by Donovan, any other person would have had a mental breakdown. But Guts, well traumatized, hunted down his tormentor and killed him in cold blood. When his father figure Gambino tried to murder him, he killed the man instead. As a member of the Band of the Hawk who survived the Invocation of Doom, could have easily given up after watching the love of his life get raped in front of his eyes by a man whose friendship he had once yearned for. Guts chose the harder way. He decided to channel that helplessness and frustration into rage, and began pursuing his wrongdoers, a fool's errand though it might have been. The staggering amount of fortitude displayed by Guts is unlike any, not just in Berserk, but in anime and manga as a whole. While there have been protagonists who are well known for their fortitude, what makes Guts stand out is the fact that he's just a lone man against the very world he inhabits. The very nature of his world opposes his existence. Thanks to his fortitude, he's able to walk on, channeling his pain to fuel his purpose. If you take into context every single psychological aspect of Guts we've spoken about so far, it really puts into perspective just what a giant of a man Guts is in terms of his mental fortitude. Simple rage isn't enough to push a man to accomplish the deeds he has or to push through things that life has thrown at him. He's just built different. A struggler in the truest sense of the word. Even now, at his absolute lowest, we believe that this fortitude of his will serve him well, and he'll emerge from the ancient stupa with his strength and resolve renewed. Though the hand of fate might deal him more tragedy, his relentless and unyielding perseverance in the face of it makes his character and his endeavor heroic. From the onset, Guts was never going to be a mere footnote in the workings of causality in its effort to gain its greatest servant, Femto. It will be interesting to see where the struggler's journey will take him and how many tests of fortitude he'll have to pass before the end. So far, we've seen Guts simply powering through every adversity causality has swung his way, and this is the first time that we see him genuinely on the ropes. This is set to be the greatest test of his fortitude and perseverance to date. We're sure that, within the stupa, Guts will come face to face with his inner demons once more. He will most likely be confronted for straying from the path of an avenger. It will be interesting to see what version of Guts emerges from the tomb. This could be a symbolic resurrection as he returns from the land of the dead with renewed vigor and purpose. Honestly, we can't wait for chapter 383 to drop to find out where our struggler is headed next. Marvelous verdict! The character of Guts is the embodiment of a complex psychological portrait that has been shaped by trauma, the unrelenting will to survive, and the concept of free will versus fate. His character development throughout the various arcs is reflective of the deep impact of childhood abuse, betrayals, sexual violence, and isolation, all of which have left an indelible mark upon his psyche. Despite the Skull Knight naming him the struggler after the events of the Fifth Eclipse, Guts was already one from the moment of his birth. Despite everything he's put through, he doesn't succumb to nihilism, even though he teeters on the edge of that line. He instead chooses to channel his pain, transforming it into something that gives him strength and fortitude to persevere against all odds. His psychological journey is full of constant ebb and flow between rage and compassion, isolation and companionship, death drive, and healing. Guts represents the peak of human endurance in the face of inhumane atrocities committed against him. By looking at the psychological aspects of his character, we come to understand that through Guts, Miura explores profound themes like identity, trauma, longing, and guilt. Thanks to this, Guts ends up being more than just a one-dimensional symbol of rage and stoicism. We get to see his evolution from an abused child to an adult that carries the weight of the things he's endured, eventually becoming symbolic of a man who's constantly in battle with the darker aspects himself. We hope that with this video, we were not only able to grant you deeper insight into Guts' psyche, but also pique your interest in Berserk as a series. It's fantastic. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to check out the rest of our channel. We post daily videos featuring all of your favorite animes and manga, especially Berserk. Thanks for sticking with us right to the end of this video, though, and we hope to see you soon in the next one. Until then, keep on struggling, fellow strugglers.